So I am not one that ever complains about society growing more sensitive. Because I think in many ways it's probably a good thing that we are going out of our way to be more kind and understanding and less judgmental of folks. But I will confess that like everybody else, that I do occasionally struggle with, well, is this an appropriate reference to make? Do I show the congregation this morning a clip from Monty Python's Life of Brian? I decided that I would walk the fine line by not showing the clip, but by explaining to you what was happening. So, Monty Python has 3 movies, The Meaning of Life. My ultimate favorite is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I used to watch that every year on my birthday. And then the third of the trilogy is The Life of Brian. And Brian is a fictitious contemporary of Jesus who is mistaken for the Messiah, and all the hilarity that ensues as they follow Brian through similar things to the story of Jesus. And at this particular scene where Pilate is offering to release someone to the crowd, Pilate has a bit of a speech impediment like unto Elmer Fudd. If those of you remember Elmer Fudd, ooh, you wascally wabbit. Or if you were perhaps younger than me on Bugs Bunny era, maybe you think of Kripke from The Big Bang Theory, who has a similar speech impediment. And there are any number of things that ensue from that. See, this is the crux, right? Are we making fun of people with speech impediments? No, I'm not. But it does lend itself to this particular scene. And that is when Pilate asks in his Elmer Fudd voice, "Who do you wish me to release for you?" The people start making up names with R's, just to hear Pilate say, "Louise Roger," or "Louise Wadwick." And of course the soldiers say, "We don't have any Rogers, we don't have any Rodericks." And I realized that this would be a great reason for somebody to tell Pilate to release Barabbas, so he could say, "Louise Barabbas." But of course, this has nothing to do with reality. The reason that the chief priests and elders want Barabbas released has nothing to do with Pilate. It has everything to do, as the scripture tells us, of their jealousy of Jesus' following. All right, so we understand the motives of the chief priests and the elders. But what about the crowds? I mean, it was just mere days ago that many in these same crowds were throwing their cloaks and their palm branches along the road and crying out, "Hosanna to the King." How on earth does the crowd flip so readily? Surely they are not jealous like the chief priests and the elders. Barabbas is bar, which means son, sort of like a bar mitzvah. Abbas or Abbas means father. Barabbas literally means son of the Father. And his first name, Matthew tells us, is the same as Jesus. Jesus Barabbas, Jesus, son of the Father. Maybe little s, son, and little f, father. He's being set up as a foil to Jesus, capital S, son of the capital F, Father. So we can't imagine how anyone would choose Jesus Barabbas over Jesus, son of the Father, Messiah, Christ. But living under Roman occupation, Barabbas was probably seen by many to be the logical, preferable, understandable choice. Pilate was known in history for intentionally antagonizing those people under his rule, for rank brutality, He was known for his anti-Semitism in the full sense of that word. We hear anti-Semitic and we think anti-Jewish. It's anti-capital S Semitic. Anyone who was of Semitic culture or spoke the Semitic language, all the peoples he was ruling over in Palestine, he thought were just rabble and barbarians and uncultured. He was a bad dude. Pilate would eventually be removed as prefect over Palestine, post Jesus, when the Jewish leadership appeals directly to Rome and tells them exactly how brutal he's been. The emperor finds him too brutal for Roman standards and removes him. Speaking of Roman standards, not principles, but now the vertical hung flags, those standards sometimes you see in the movies, right, that they're parading with, the red flags, and they usually have the eagles on top. Pilate, early on in his rule, decided that he was going to place all over the holy city these Roman standards, knowing full well that the eagles on top were considered graven images by the Jews and would be looked at as being idolatrous. He just wanted to stick it to them. Pilate had also tried, more out of spite than necessity, because Rome had plenty of its own money, to requisition, that is, steal money from the temple for a Roman infrastructure project to build an aqueduct. Again, he was just trying to tweak the Jewish leadership. In both of these cases, Pilate was forced to back down in order to keep the peace. People began to riot. But Luke's gospel notes, almost in passing, a horrific event where Pilate actually slaughtered a number of Galileans. We don't know just how many, presumably at the temple, because then he commingled their blood with the blood of the sacrifices that they were offering at the temple, bringing both death and defilement in one heinous act. This is just how brutal Pilate was. And what is often read by us later in the Gospels as Pilate's judiciousness in finding Jesus innocent is likely attributable to the fact that he just doesn't see in Jesus any actual physical threat to Rome. I don't know. Why are these Jews all up in arms about this guy? He's only an annoyance to the chief priests and the elders of the Jews, and it could well be that Pilate just likes tweaking them a little bit more and showing them who's boss by drawing out the process. And so as awful as Pilate was, as onerous as Roman occupation was, who would the crowds want released? The man whose kingdom is not of this world, who preaches truth, inclusion, and love of enemies? Or the man whose kingdom is clearly Israel, who will stick it to Rome, humiliate Pilate, and spill their enemies' blood? The chief priests and the elders had little trouble convincing the crowd to choose the latter, to release Barabbas, the insurrectionist, and the vigilante hero. We don't have any historical corroboration of a Passover custom for releasing a prisoner, though it does comport with other instances of Roman clemency mentioned in the works of the famous Jewish historian of that time, Josephus. Pilate may well have felt compelled to this custom in order to placate the people, and balancing his previous cruelties with an occasional act of clemency. It certainly was not, knowing Pilate, a gesture of mercy or magnanimity. No, it was more a strategy of manipulating and mollifying. Pilate did it from a position of impotence. And what better way for the people than to humiliate Pilate, but to turn his charade of strength into a parade of his weakness, forcing him to release a truly threatening person that jeopardized Rome. See, the choice between Barabbas and Jesus wasn't simply a choice between two men. It was a choice between two different ideologies. And it was a decision as to which vision of a Messiah the people wanted and would accept. Which Jesus would they choose? Jesus Barabbas, son of the Father, a scion of violence and worldly power, or Jesus of Nazareth, son of the Father, a humble, suffering servant who himself healed a Roman centurion's servant? Didn't just tolerate the enemy, he healed them. In dark times, we all too often place our faith in violence and vengeance and succumb to that satanic voice that tells us the only way to avoid being victimized is to become victimizers. We are Barabbas. And choosing to be Barabbas, false sons of the Father and false daughters, represents the human predilection to sin. With Adam and Eve, we choose the shortcut of eating from the garden instead of walking with God, because we want to be in control. Like Lamech, we cry, if Cain is avenged sevenfold, Lamech will be avenged 77-fold, because we prefer retribution to reconciliation. Like a frightened Israel, we choose Saul to be king over us, putting our trust in horse and chariot and military might, because that is the way of the nations all around us, and we want to fight fire with fire. With those the prophets chastened, we turn a blind eye to injustice, the exploitation of others around us, especially the poor, because we want to maintain our own prosperity. With Peter, we rebuke Jesus for choosing suffering at the cross and servanthood at the table, because we see meekness as weakness and humility as humiliation. And alongside the crowd before Pilate, we choose Barabbas, because living with Jesus is fantastic, but dying with him is frightening. Now we know that the Jesus in John's Gospel speaks on a whole different plane from the other characters in John's Gospel, right? You remember Nicodemus, he's confused about being born. Anothein is the Greek word, because he hears that as being literally born again from the mother's womb, and he thinks, how on earth can that be? But Jesus is talking up here. When he uses the word anothein, he means being born anew or being born from above, a spiritual rebirth. You remember the Samaritan woman believing that Jesus was literally talking about well water that eternally eliminates thirst, while Jesus was actually talking about himself as living water. You remember all those things, right? Not terribly subtle in John's Gospel. It's like everybody else is here and Jesus is up here. Matthew's Gospel has a similar dynamic, only more subtle. It happens 3 times in our text alone today. And the different hearings happen not between Jesus and the characters of the story, but between the characters in the story and those of us who are the readers. The text began, now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said, you say so. Pilate means it, as do the chief priests and the elders, as an accusation. We, the readers, hear it as an affirmation that Jesus is king, just not in the way they apprehended it. The text continued. But when he was accused, there's the accusation, by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many accusations they make against you? But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. We, the readers, can't help but hear resonances of Isaiah 53. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. We hear like a lamb, while Pilate thinks like a fool. The text ended. So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. Then the people as a whole answered, his blood be on us and on our children. As Pilate washes his hands of culpability, and as the people accept that culpability for themselves, they speak in the language of guilt. But when we, in hindsight, as the readers, hear the language of washing and blood, we hear the language of forgiveness and redemption. There's a salvific irony here. The people see guilt, but Jesus offers grace. The blood that will be on their children is not the blood of guilt, but the blood of his love. We are Barabbas. But Jesus, the true Son of the Father, offers us this grace, offers us the opportunity to follow him and become more like him, more like the sons and daughters of our heavenly parent that we were created to be. Jesus redeems Barabbas and longs to redeem us too. Thanks be to God.
Amen.